"Excuse me, are you with the catering staff?" Gabby turned. It was Alexander Hargrove, a billionaire tech mogul known for his arrogance, tall, silver-haired, eyes like cold glass. His tone wasn't curious. It was dismissive. "No, sir. I'm a guest." Gabby smiles politely. He tilted his head, a smirk tugging at his mouth. "Ah, you sounded different. American, right? Or is that Caribbean?" Her cheeks warmed. The laughter nearby quieted, people listening. "American. Born and raised in Georgia." "Georgia? Well, I suppose that explains the twang. Don't worry, darling. You'll pick up proper English eventually." The crowd chuckled, soft, but sharp enough to cut. Gabby smiled faintly, her throat tightening. She could have said something. She could have walked out. But she didn't, because what no one in that room knew was that Gabby Miles spoke 6 languages fluently, including the one he had just tried to belittle her for. And soon, she'd remind them that the sound of intelligence has no accent. To understand how Gabby ended up in that ballroom, we have to start months earlier, across the ocean in a small apartment in Atlanta, Georgia. Gabby grew up in a neighborhood where ambition was louder than opportunity. Her mother, Vanessa Miles, worked as a public school teacher and part-time tutor. Her father had passed away when she was just 6, but what she lacked in luxury, she made up for in curiosity. As a child, Gabby would sit by the window with a worn-out globe her mom found at a thrift store, spinning it slowly and pointing at places she dreamed of visiting. "Paris," she'd whisper. "Rome, Tokyo." Her mother used to laugh. "Baby, you better learn how to say hello in all those places then." And she did. By the time Gabby turned 17, she could greet you in French, Italian, Chui, Japanese, and Arabic. Not because she had fancy tutors, but because she spent hours online watching free videos, mimicking pronunciations, recording herself until she got it right. She had a gift, not just for languages, but for listening. "Language," she used to say, "is just empathy in sound." When she graduated, Gabby couldn't afford to travel. So she worked waitressing by day, translating documents online by night. Every saved dollar went into what she called her passport fund. And finally, at 28, she boarded her first international flight. Destination: London, the city she dreamed of since childhood. London was everything she imagined: rainy, historic, alive. But it was also cold in ways she hadn't expected. At first, people were kind. But once she spoke, the stares began. At the market: "Where are you from?" "Oh, the States? You people talk funny." At a bookstore: "Your English is unique." At a cafe: "You sound like one of those Netflix shows." They thought it was harmless teasing. But each comment felt like a tiny cut, invisible but deep. Still, Gabby smiled through it all, because she wasn't in London to be understood. She was there to learn, to connect, to grow. Then one afternoon, while volunteering at a local youth center, she met Eliza, a British Ghanaian woman who instantly clicked with her energy. Eliza was everything Gabby admired: confident, accomplished, and kind. She worked in international relations and believed in bringing people together through language and culture. When Eliza invited Gabby to the Clarendon Charity Gala, she said, "You belong in rooms like that. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Gabby hesitated. "But I don't own gowns or glitter." Eliza laughed. "Wear your smile. That's more powerful than any designer label." And so, Gabby went, with hope in her heart and grace in her stride. She didn't know that the night would test her spirit in ways she'd never imagined. That one man's cruelty would echo across the room. And that her response, not her accent, would be what people remembered. Sometimes the world measures intelligence by tone, but true brilliance needs no translation. When Gabby first arrived in London, she imagined it like a book she'd been waiting to read her whole life. Elegant chapters, broad horizons. But books have margins, and in those margins people wrote assumptions about her before she ever spoke a single word. She found work where she could: part-time at a language school helping immigrant adults find their voice in English, doing late shifts at a cozy cafe near King's Cross, translating for a small NGO that arranged cultural exchange programs. None of it paid much, But each job fed her curiosity and gave her small, steady platforms to practice the dozens of voices in her head. There were moments of grace. A professor from SOAS who took her on as an unpaid research assistant, a group of international volunteers who became her second family. And there were the quiet humiliations, the barista who asked where she was really from before he took her order, the landlord who raised his eyebrows when she spoke her home address, the taxi driver who assumed she didn't understand a conversation about politics in the back seat. She learned early to measure the room, not to hide herself, but to understand how others wanted to see her. Gabby called it survival with dignity. And then there was Eliza. Eliza was the kind of person who walked into a room and made it feel like it had been waiting for her. A fellow volunteer who worked in diaspora engagement, born in London to Ghanaian parents. Her laughter was a quick currency of trust. She introduced Gabby to circles that moved in polished rhythms. Poetry nights in converted warehouses, fundraisers in Georgian townhouses, debates at private clubs where opinions sometimes felt more like currency than conviction. People here will try to fit you into a frame, Eliza once said over tea at a crowded market stall. You decide if you'll live inside it or redraw the borders. Gabby redrew them. She kept practicing languages because each new word felt like a small rebellion against being boxed in. In Chui, she learned how to say thank you with precision that made elders smile. In French, she could argue softly and fiercely in the same sentence. In Japanese, her pronunciation invited surprised approval from elderly shopkeepers. Language became the way she moved through London without bending to others' expectations. But no city is only made of streets and small mercies. Cities have rooms reserved for those who already have power. One of those rooms was the Clarendon Royal Hotel, a gilded palace of marble staircases and invisible ropes that separated the public from the private. It was in one of those rooms, months before the gala, that Gabby first noticed Alexander Hargrove. She had been invited modestly, quietly, to a corporate talk where an NGO partner was presenting on urban resilience. The Clarendon shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Gabby had worn her best emerald green gown, the one that made her feel like the woman she was trying to be. He was there because he funded the project. He moved like money. Certain, unbothered, practiced in an arrogance that passed for charm at elite tables. A few people in the crowd praised his vision. Others applauded politely while their eyes flicked to his watch. Gabby watched him speak, rehearsed cadences, a string of philanthropic statistics. He sounded like a man who liked being admired for the size of his bank balance, and he was rewarded for it. After the talk, he walked the room with the air of a man accustomed to influence. People leaned in. People smiled. Doors opened for him. When he reached the reception area, he heard Gabby laugh. A brief, soft laugh at something her colleague had said, and his head turned. "Where are you from?" he asked casually, as if he asked this of a new menu item rather than a person. "Georgia," she said. "Atlanta originally." He arched an eyebrow and offered an amused tilt. "Ah, from the American South. Charming." His tone wrapped around the last word like a ribbon and tightened. That small exchange might have been nothing more than a prick that passes, but it stuck in Gabby's mind because of how easily he dismissed her. He seemed to measure her by the sound of syllables and the ease of his privilege. That night she went home thinking, the richest person in the room has a place to throw a joke. The person with less has nowhere to hide when it lands. Secondary characters populated the margins of her life and the story's world. There was Marcus, the cafe owner who taught her how to make a flat white and how to fold a CV so it looked like a promise. Sophia, an Italian doctoral student who became Gabby's late-night philosophy sparring partner. Jamal, a Ghanaian-British publicist who believed in her and pushed her toward opportunities his network tossed like breadcrumbs. Sometimes generous, sometimes not. And then there was a more subtle rival. Charlotte Pembroke, a polished fundraiser who hummed with entitlement. Charlotte smiled at Gabby in the way people smile when they see someone they believe they've already categorized. She was the kind who would compliment Gabby's English with a faux innocence that stung. "You have such a lovely way of speaking," Charlotte would say in a tone that translated to, "You're exotic enough to be interesting, but not interesting enough to be equal." Gabby learned to keep pride and patience in the same pocket. She would respond with a genuine smile and correct a tiny misconception with gentle authority. A small language lesson here and there that never felt like a show. She wanted to teach, not lecture. She believed dignity fed the room more than anger ever could. But beneath that patience, there was a current of anger that sometimes surfaced in private. At the mirror, at friends over a bottle of cheap wine, at a city that praised diversity while policing its sounds. She kept a notebook, a stubborn little thing, where she wrote phrases and moments that felt like teeth marks on her spirit. She planned travel routes in it. She wrote phrases in Chui next to grocery lists in English. She copied lines from poems and turned them into promises to herself. The Clarendon's charity gala, the night Alexander openly mocked her accent, did not come from nowhere. It came from months of quiet dismissals. Microaggressions at the market, a friend's offhand remark in a group chat, a landlord's worry over references. Each instance had been like a pebble dropped into a still pond. The gala was the wave. Gabby arrived that night with an intention that was gentle but determined. She wanted to honor Eliza's invitation, to contribute to conversations about global education, and to keep learning what the world had to teach her. She did not go to be a spectacle. She did not go to teach anyone a lesson. But sometimes, stories bend in ways that ask for a demonstration of character. That evening, Gabby's character would be measured by restraint, and later by grace. And yet, before the mocking words were spoken, the scene had a few more actors to introduce. A camera phone hero who captured the moment, someone in a waistcoat who would later post the clip with an indifferent caption, an older couple at table 12 who would call into a morning show to share their opinion, a young intern who'd watch silently and later wrestle with whether to speak out or not. All these people would become the instruments of the story's rising conflict. None of them knew that within Gabby's soft voice was a lifetime of languages ready to be called upon, not to punish, but to reveal, not to tear down, but to lift up. Because the thing about grace is it isn't weaponized. It doesn't point fingers. It does something quieter and more difficult. It insists on being itself, fully and plainly, in the face of insult. That night, the Clarendon Royal Hotel gleamed like a diamond trying too hard to shine. The city outside was cold and gray, but inside, everything shimmered: champagne flutes, sequined gowns, words dipped in polite performance. It was the kind of event where people clapped too softly and smiled too wide. Gabby had been invited through Eliza, the same friend who believed that proximity could sometimes be power. "Just be you," Eliza had said as they walked into the marble lobby. "Your presence alone speaks volumes." Gabby smiled. "Let's hope they're fluent in that language," she'd replied. Inside, the ballroom glowed gold. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved like clockwork, and a string quartet played near the stage. Gabby felt the familiar thud of nerves in her chest. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. She stood out. Her deep brown skin against the sea of ivory gowns and navy suits wasn't something she could mute, even if she wanted to. She smoothed her dress. Elegant, simple, something she'd saved from her translator salary, and followed Eliza toward the networking tables. First, it went fine. She mingled politely, answered questions about her work, talked about language diversity in education. People listened, nodded. Some even seemed genuinely interested. Then Alexander Hargrove entered. He didn't just walk into a room. He announced himself without saying a word. His name carried the kind of gravity that made people rearrange their smiles. He built his fortune on luxury developments, high-end apartments, hotel chains, and charity ventures that made his brand look softer than it was. The tabloids loved him. The government listened to him. And the guests, they orbited around him like planets around a sun that didn't know it was burning too bright. He spotted Gabby across the room, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition. That woman from the conference. He approached, drink in hand, his tailored tux catching the light. Well, he said, with that polished arrogance of men who confuse charm with control. If it isn't the young linguist from the conference. Still, practicing that southern drawl. His tone was casual enough to sound innocent, until you caught the smirk underneath. Gabby felt it immediately. that slow twist of condescension that had followed her all her life. The laugh from a stranger on the tube when she said water with her Atlanta softness. The look of surprise when she switched accents seamlessly to match a French colleague's rhythm. She smiled politely. "Still fluent in it," she said. "And 5 others, actually." He chuckled, a sound sharp enough to cut. 5? That's impressive. Though I suppose where you come from, English must have taken a while to master. For a second, silence wrapped the table. Eliza's hand froze midair with her champagne glass. A nearby guest shifted uncomfortably. Someone laughed quietly, not sure if it was okay to laugh. Gabby inhaled slowly, the kind of breath you take when you're deciding whether to defend yourself or let dignity do the talking. "Actually," she said softly, "I studied English linguistics at Emory, then French literature in Paris, Japanese through Kyoto University, and now Arabic at the School of Oriental and African Studies. So, yes, it took a while to love them all." Her tone was calm, almost kind, but the sting underneath was deliberate, refined like a blade made from her years of patience. Alexander blinked, caught off guard. He laughed again, too loudly this time. "Well, aren't you full of surprises?" And just like that, the tension dissolved into the crowd's discomfort. That peculiar British awkwardness that fills the air when someone says something too real for polite company. But Alexander wasn't done. He clinked his glass, smiling. "Tell me, Miss Gabrielle Miles, right? Miss Miles, since you're so well-traveled, maybe you can help me with something." He leaned closer, voice dropping into that performative arrogance that men like him mistook for charm. "Do all your languages come with that accent?" The crowd tittered. Someone muttered, "Oh dear." Eliza's face went hard. "Alexander," but Gabby stopped her with a look. Her expression didn't change, but her spine straightened, and her eyes went calm, like still water before a storm. "Would you like me to say that in French?" she asked, her voice smooth. "Or perhaps in Japanese? Maybe Chui." He raised an eyebrow, playing along. "By all means." So she did. In perfect, fluid French, she said, "On jugue toujours les autres à travers ses propres limites." We always judge others by the limits of ourselves. Then, in Chui, her tone deepened, graceful, commanding, "Nakasatia and awanam. Speak not ill of what you don't understand." The words rolled across the table, melodic and firm. Guests looked up. Conversations stilled. Even the violinist paused for a heartbeat. Alexander tried to laugh it off, but his cheeks flushed. Not just from embarrassment, but from something more dangerous. Exposure. Someone had recorded it. The young intern from earlier, the one who'd been hovering near the sponsor table. The camera lens caught everything. His mocking tone, her quiet power, the stunned silence that followed. And the next morning, that clip would make its way online. 15 seconds of truth wrapped in calm dignity. But for now, the room buzzed. Whispers threaded through the crowd. Charlotte Pembroke, ever the opportunist, leaned toward Alexander with a half-smile. "Well, she's certainly articulate." Gabby heard it. That word. Articulate. The way people used it when they didn't expect intelligence to come wrapped in brown skin. She excused herself quietly, walked out into the lobby. Eliza followed. "Gabby, you handled that beautifully," Eliza said. Gabby shook her head. "No, I handled it politely. There's a difference." Outside, London rain had begun to fall, soft and cold, the kind that painted reflections on the pavement. She stood there for a long moment, watching the lights shimmer on the wet street. Her heart pounded with equal parts pride and exhaustion. Inside, Alexander ordered another drink. He joked with the others, trying to bury the awkwardness under laughter. But he couldn't shake the image of her, calm, composed, unbothered, while he'd stumbled over his own arrogance. And as fate would have it, that wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. Because life, in its strange poetry, has a way of circling back, especially when lessons remain unlearned. Gabby's backstory was not a promise of instant victory. It was a slow forging. In thrift store globes, language tapes at midnight, unpaid internships, and small acts of kindness that stacked like bricks. She carried it to the Clarendon like armor made of syllables and small mercies. And when Alexander laughed that night, and when the room tilted toward his joke, the stage for the turning point was already set. By morning, the world had already chosen its side. 15 seconds. That was all it took. 15 seconds of shaky camera footage. The billionaire laughing, the black woman answering him in 3 languages, the stunned silence that followed. The clip spread faster than a rumor in rush hour traffic. By noon, it had over 2 million views. By evening, it had its own hashtag the accent test. People started using it to expose microaggressions caught on camera. Waiters mocking accents, customers talking down to immigrant workers, employers feigning surprise at competence. It became a movement overnight. But Gabby? She didn't post it. She didn't even know it had gone viral until Eliza burst into her flat that morning. Phone in hand, eyes wide. "Gabby, you're trending." Gabby, half asleep, blinked. "Trending." Eliza turned the phone toward her. The screen lit up with her face. Calm, confident, eyes steady. As she spoke those words in French and Chui, the caption read, "Billionaire mocks her accent. She responds with class and fluency in 6 languages." Gabby sat up slowly. "Oh no," she murmured. "I didn't want this." Eliza laughed. "Maybe not, but the world did." News outlets scrambled for the story. Some focused on her intelligence, others on her calm. A few tried to spin it into a clash of cultures. But the majority saw what it really was, a reminder that class doesn't always come from money, and fluency doesn't just mean speech. Meanwhile, the Clarendon Hotel's PR team panicked. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Board members called emergency meetings. And Alexander Hargrove? He was furious. First, he tried to laugh it off. He released a short statement through his assistant. It was a light-hearted moment taken out of context. "I have great respect for diversity and multilingualism. But the internet doesn't forgive easily, especially not when arrogance wears a tuxedo." Within hours, clips resurfaced, old interviews where Alexander made tone-deaf remarks, photos of lavish galas, articles about questionable business practices. People began connecting dots. The tide turned fast. His sponsors distanced themselves. His hotel chain's bookings dropped. And then, an unexpected twist. The board of the Clarendon Group announced that the company would be partnering with a new global cultural initiative, spearheaded by none other than Dr. Gabrielle Miles. Yes, Dr. Gabrielle Miles. She'd completed her linguistics PhD months ago, quietly, with little fanfare. Her dissertation on multilingual empathy had earned recognition from a cultural foundation that happened to be in talks with Clarendon for a language outreach program. They'd reached out after the video. They wanted her as a consultant. And when the news broke that she was the same woman from the viral clip, public support made her the natural choice to lead the initiative. Eliza could hardly contain her joy. "Girl, do you understand what just happened? You didn't just survive that moment. You changed the narrative." Gabby smiled faintly. "I didn't want revenge," she said softly. "Just respect." Meanwhile, Alexander faced the slow, silent unraveling of his reputation. TV interviews canceled. Investors withdrew. Invitations dried up. In boardrooms, whispers began. "He's a liability. He lacks cultural awareness." He was forced to issue a second statement. This one less defensive, more desperate. "I deeply regret my words and behavior at the Clarendon event. I intend to take time to reflect, listen, and learn." It read like every other apology typed through clenched teeth. But the real blow came months later, when he walked into a meeting for the cultural initiative launch and found Gabby seated at the head of the table. She stood when he entered, extended her hand. "Mr. Hargrove," she said evenly. "It's good to see you again. Thank you for being here." Her voice was calm, her smile effortless, but her eyes, they held something deeper. Not vengeance, not triumph, just a kind of mercy that makes pride feel small. He hesitated, then shook her hand. "Dr. Miles," he murmured. "Congratulations on everything." She nodded. "Thank you." And thank you for inspiring this project. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the loudest mistakes. The room went still. He knew what she meant, and he also knew she could have humiliated him the way he once humiliated her. But she didn't. That restraint, that grace was the real power. As the months passed, Gabby's program expanded across London schools. She gave talks about language as empathy, about the way speech connects us more deeply than appearance ever could. In one of her talks, she said, "The sound of someone's voice isn't an invitation to judge. It's an invitation to understand." Those words echoed across campuses, newsrooms, and social media feeds. Even Alexander attended one of her public lectures quietly, sitting at the back. And when she noticed him leaving, she simply smiled, not out of smugness, but forgiveness. Because in the end, the story wasn't about humiliation, it was about transformation. It wasn't about a billionaire losing face. It was about a woman reclaiming her voice and reminding the world that fluency isn't just about language. It's about humanity. 6 months later, London stood still for an evening. The Global Voices Summit had taken over Westminster Hall, one of those grand, echoing spaces that seemed to hold the weight of every speech ever spoken there. Politicians, educators, journalists, activists, everyone was there. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Gabrielle Miles, the same woman who, not long ago, had been mocked for her accent by a man who thought power meant volume. Now her voice filled the room, soft, steady, deliberate, and the world listened. The event was broadcast live on BBC and streamed globally. The summit's theme? Language as Bridge, How Speech Builds Humanity. Gabby took the podium wearing a simple ivory dress, her hair pulled into a neat bun. No extravagance, no armor, just elegance born of authenticity. She began with a smile. "When I was a little girl in Atlanta," she said, "my grandmother told me something that never left me. She said, 'The way you speak can open doors, but the way you listen decides who walks through.'" The audience leaned in. She spoke of her journey. Not the viral fame, not the scandal, but the deeper truth beneath it. How every accent carries history. How every tone carries story. How what some call imperfect English might actually be perfect courage. And as she spoke, the camera found faces in the crowd. Teachers nodding, students taking notes, even journalists blinking back quiet awe. Then the camera landed on him. Alexander Hargrove, sitting in the second row. No cameras pointed at him, no entourage around him. Just a man in a gray suit, eyes lowered, jaw tight. He hadn't come for show. He'd come because he needed to. Gabby saw him. Their eyes met for half a second, enough to pull the air out of the room for anyone watching closely. But she didn't falter. She didn't let the story stop there. Instead, she smiled. "Sometimes," she continued, "we meet people who remind us how fragile dignity can be, and how powerful it becomes when we choose it anyway." Forgiveness is a kind of fluency too. One that doesn't always sound like words. The audience went silent. That line, that simple, graceful line, carried more weight than any confrontation ever could. Then she paused, looked down at her notes, and with a quiet laugh added, "For those wondering, yes, I do still have an accent. I also have 6 languages and 1 heart, and that's enough." The camera cut to Alexander. His eyes glistened. He clapped slowly, then fully, like a man applauding the truth that had once humbled him. When the applause faded and the event ended, he approached her backstage, careful, hesitant. No cameras, no crowd, just 2 people in the quiet hum of reflection. He cleared his throat. "Dr. Miles." She turned, calm as ever. "Mr. Hargrove, I came tonight because..." He began, then stopped. The words seemed to catch in his throat. "Because I realized I spent most of my life talking, not listening." Gabby nodded gently. "Most people do, but it's never too late to learn." He looked at her then, really looked. "You didn't have to forgive me," he said softly, "but you did, and I'll never forget that." Gabby smiled. "Forgiveness isn't for forgetting, Alexander. It's for freeing." He nodded slowly. "I'm learning. She extended her hand, just like she had in that boardroom months ago. But this time, the gesture wasn't formal. It was human, and when he took it, something shifted, not just between them, but in the air itself. The arrogance was gone. The tension dissolved. What remained was humility. Outside, the night was soft and clear, London after rain. Eliza waited by the car, phone buzzing with congratulatory messages. Gabby slipped into the passenger seat, quiet. "You did it," Eliza said. "You didn't just win, you changed something." Gabby looked out the window, the reflection of the city lights flickering across her face. "Maybe, but it's not about winning. It's about being heard without shouting." Eliza smiled. "And you did that, perfectly." In a city of millions of voices, one woman reminded the world that the real power isn't in how we speak, but in how we choose to listen. And somewhere, in a quiet office, Alexander Hargrove, once untouchable, rewrote his company's inclusion policy line by line, dedicating the new Cultural Education Fund to her program. He didn't do it for headlines. He did it because sometimes grace leaves a mark deeper than shame ever could. Respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. In the weeks after the summit, Dr. Gabrielle Miles's name circled the globe, not as a viral clip, but as a symbol of grace under fire, of what it means to respond to ignorance with intelligence, and to cruelty with calm. Her speech trended for days, but unlike before, the headlines weren't about humiliation. They were about hope. The BBC replayed her words under the caption, "The accent that changed the conversation." Schools across the UK began inviting her to speak. She launched a foundation, the Bridge Program, pairing immigrant students with mentors in speech, debate, and cultural leadership. Soon, she was back in classrooms, not as the viral inspector, but as a teacher again, and somehow that felt like coming home. "Gabby, take your time. Your voice is enough. Let's hear your version of English." The boy smiles, nervous but brave, and begins. The class listens, really listens, and in that moment you realize, this is what her fight was always for. "Eliza, so, Dr. Miles, what's next? A TED Talk? Parliament? The UN?" Gabby chuckles. "Maybe just breakfast. I think I've done enough talking for a while." Eliza laughs. "Fair enough. But you know you started something, right? People are actually listening now." Gabby sips her coffee, watching the water ripple beneath the bridge. "That's all I ever wanted." He opens a letter handwritten, not typed. It's from Gabby. "Dear Alexander, I hope this finds you well. Thank you for supporting the program. I believe people can change, not through guilt, but through growth. You've proven that. Keep listening. The world needs more of that. GM." He reads it twice, then sets it down beside a newspaper clipping, the same one from months ago that had nearly ended his career. Only now he doesn't hide it. He keeps it as a reminder of the day he began to learn again. Children practicing public speaking with confidence. Workers in offices attending inclusion workshops. Teachers quoting Gabby's line, "The way you listen decides who walks through." Some stories don't end with revenge or ruin. Some end with reflection and a second chance. Gabrielle Miles never wanted to silence anyone. She just wanted to remind the world that kindness isn't weakness. And somewhere between her words and the silence that followed, the world learned to hear differently. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and redemption. Because in the end, the most powerful sound on earth isn't the voice that speaks the loudest. It's the one that speaks with grace.